The moment I realized my boss was secretly recording my screen, I stopped being his employee. I became his biggest security vulnerability. And the thing about vulnerabilities is this: the person exploiting them rarely knows they exist until it's far too late. What Richard didn't understand, what he couldn't have understood, was that when you install surveillance software on a machine used by someone who actually knows how computers work, you're not gaining control, you're handing it over. In the next 25 minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly how I went from a loyal remote employee, clocking in, hitting deadlines, keeping my head down, to the one person my paranoid boss could never actually see. I'm going to show you how I discovered the spy software, how I quietly reverse engineered what it was doing, how I mapped its behaviors, learned its reporting cycles, and identified its weak points, and then, without raising a single alarm, how I replaced the real spy program with a harmless dummy application, a digital prop, a decoy that looked right, acted right, and reported nothing of value. Richard thought he was watching me. In reality, he was watching a ghost, and he never knew the difference. This isn't a story about hacking. It's not a story about drama or confrontation or burning bridges. It's a story about patience, about precision, about what happens when someone underestimates you and you let them keep underestimating you all the way to the end. I'd been at Helix Marketing Solutions for a little over 2 years when the pandemic reshaped everything. Like a lot of companies, Helix went remote almost overnight. Suddenly, we were all working from kitchen tables and spare bedrooms, communicating through chat apps and video calls, proving against every prediction management had made that yes, the work could still get done. In fact, for me, it got done better. Without the constant interruptions of an open plan office, I was sharper, faster. My project turnaround times improved by nearly 30%. My client satisfaction scores went up, but there was a problem. Richard couldn't see me. Richard Kessler was our department head. Mid-50s, old-school mentality, the kind of manager who measured productivity by the number of hours your car sat in the parking lot. Remote work made him nervous. You could hear it in his voice during team calls, the way he'd ask overly specific questions about what we were working on when we'd finish, whether we were available at any given moment. He didn't trust what he couldn't observe. And for a while, I thought that was just his personality. Annoying, yes. Micromanaging, absolutely, but manageable. Then came the security update. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon, a company-wide email from a mandatory software maintenance. Please restart your machine and allow the update to complete. This is part of our ongoing effort to improve endpoint security. Nothing unusual on the surface. Companies push updates all the time. But something about this one felt off. First, the timing. We'd had a security patch just 2 weeks earlier. That one had come from our actual IT manager, Dave, and included specific technical notes about what was being fixed. This email was vague, almost deliberately so. Second, the sender. The email came from a generic IT security address I'd never seen before. When I checked the domain, it matched our company's. But the formatting was slightly different from Dave's usual messages. Third, and this is what really caught my attention, the file size. I work in marketing, but I have a background in information systems. Before Helix, I spent 4 years doing web development and systems administration for a smaller firm. I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but I understand how computers work at a level most people in my department don't. And this security update was large. Too large for a simple patch. I let it install anyway. Partly because refusing would have been conspicuous. Partly because I wanted to see what it actually was. After the restart, I opened Task Manager. Not the simple version, but the detailed view that shows every running process. And there it was, Day, a new program I'd never seen before. It had a generic name, something like Wind Service Monitor XE, designed to blend in, designed to look like just another piece of system infrastructure. But I knew my machine. I knew what ran on startup, and this wasn't part of it. I didn't confront anyone. I simply made a note, and I started watching. Over the next few days, I paid close attention. The program ran constantly. It used almost no CPU, just enough to stay active without triggering performance warnings. But every 15 minutes or so, I noticed a small spike in network activity. Outbound traffic, data being sent somewhere. I checked the destination. It was routed through an internal company server. Nothing external, but the volume was consistent, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. That's when I ran a quiet test. I opened a random document, something benign, just notes for a project meeting, and typed a sentence that had no business being in that file. Test phrase, Lemon Orchard 17. I saved it. Then I waited. 48 hours later, I got an email from Richard. It wasn't about the document, not directly, but it was about the project that document was attached to. A project Richard had no reason to be reviewing at that stage, a project that wasn't even due for another 2 weeks. He asked why I was spending so much time on preliminary notes instead of focusing on the deliverables. He referenced phrasing from that document, not the test phrase itself, but sentences near it, contextual details I hadn't shared with anyone yet. And just like that, I knew. He wasn't just monitoring my hours. He was watching my screen. That night, I sat in my home office with the lights off, staring at my laptop like it had betrayed me. And in a way, it had. Every email I'd written, every personal note, every idle moment of browsing, every private thought I typed into a text file thinking no one would see it. Richard had been there, invisible, silent, collecting. I felt violated. Not physically, but something close. My workspace was supposed to be mine. My thoughts, my processes, my messy first drafts and half-baked ideas. That's how work happens. That's how creativity functions. But now I understood. Every keystroke had an audience. Some people in that moment would have confronted HR, filed a complaint, demanded answers. But I knew how that would go. Richard was senior leadership. The company had never disclosed any monitoring policy, which meant either they were hiding it or they didn't care about the legal gray area. Either way, my word against his would end one way, with me labeled as difficult and quietly pushed out. So I made a different decision. I wasn't going to fight him. I was going to outthink him. And by the time I was done, he'd be watching a ghost. The first rule of any intelligence operation, and yes, I did start thinking of it in those terms, is to understand exactly what you're dealing with, not assumptions, not guesses, facts. So I began my reconnaissance. Win Service Monitor EXE wasn't a real Windows service. That name was camouflage, designed to make it look like system infrastructure to anyone glancing at Task Manager. But when I dug deeper, checking the file properties, the installation path, the digital signature, I found something interesting. The program was published by a company called Oversight Solutions. A quick search confirmed what I suspected. Oversight Solutions made commercial employee monitoring software. Their flagship product was designed for remote workforce visibility. A polite way of saying it, let employers watch what their workers were doing on their computers. Screen recording, keystroke logging, application tracking, website monitoring, all of it packaged in a sleek dashboard that management could access from anywhere. In other words, Richard wasn't doing this himself. He paid for a professional-grade spy tool, and it was installed on my machine without my knowledge or consent. Now, here's the thing about surveillance software. It's designed to be invisible to the average user, but invisible isn't the same as undetectable. Every program leaves traces, log files, registry entries, scheduled tasks, network connections. If you know where to look, and I did, you can map exactly what the software is doing when it does it and where it sends its data. So I mapped it. I spent the next week quietly documenting everything. The program activated every time I logged in. It ran in the background, capturing screenshots at set intervals, roughly every 90 seconds based on the disk writes I observed. Those screenshots were compressed and bundled, then transmitted to a company server during low activity periods. Usually late morning or early afternoon, when network traffic was high enough that the extra data wouldn't stand out. There was also a keystroke logging component, less active but present. It seemed to trigger only when certain applications were open, email, chat, the company's project management tool. The more I learned, the more calculated it all seemed. This wasn't a panicked ad hoc installation. Someone, probably Richard, possibly with IT's cooperation, had configured this carefully, targeted it at specific behaviors, designed it to fly under the radar, which meant if I was going to neutralize it, I had to be just as careful. I considered several options. The simplest was to uninstall the program, but that would be immediately obvious. The monitoring dashboard would show my machine as offline and it would be alerted. I could disable it through the registry or block its network traffic. But again, any interruption in reporting would be a red flag. Richard would know something had changed. What I needed was subtler. I needed the spy software to keep running, or at least appear to keep running, while actually capturing nothing useful. And that's when the idea came to me. What if I didn't disable the spy? What if I just replaced it? Here's the logic. The monitoring software was just a program. An executable file. It ran from a specific folder, under a specific name. If I could create a dummy version, a harmless application that did nothing but look like it was running, and swap it for the real thing, the system would still show the program as active. But it would capture nothing, transmit nothing, record nothing. Richard would see a green light on his dashboard. He'd assume everything was working, and I'd be invisible. Of course, there were risks. The real program might have integrity checks, ways of verifying it hadn't been tampered with. If Oversight Solutions built their software well, it would detect the swap and alert the administrator. There might also be logs, timestamps showing when the file was modified. If IT ever looked closely, they might notice something was off. And then there was the human element, Richard himself. If he suddenly stopped seeing useful data from my machine, would he get suspicious? Would he order a deeper investigation? I weighed every angle, and I decided the risk was worth it. Here's why. Richard wasn't a tech person. He relied on it for the heavy lifting, and IT, frankly, was understaffed and overworked. As long as the dashboard showed all systems normal, no one would dig deeper. The software itself was commercial, not custom built. Oversight Solutions designed it for ease of use, not for paranoid verification. The odds of sophisticated integrity checks were low. And as for the file modification timestamps, I had a plan for that too. But before I could execute anything, I needed one more piece of information. I needed to know exactly how the software reported its status. So I set a trap. I created a secondary user account on my machine, a hidden admin profile that Richard's monitoring wouldn't know about. From that account, I could observe the spy software's behavior without being inside its field of view. For 3 days, I logged into the shadow account and watched. I saw the main program ping a verification server every 6 hours. A simple I'm alive signal. No data payload, just a handshake confirming the client was active. I saw the screenshot bundles upload during predictable windows, always midday, always to the same internal server. And I noticed something crucial. The program's activity was entirely file-based. It wrote screenshots to a hidden folder, then transmitted them. It didn't stream anything live. It didn't verify the content of what it captured, only that it was capturing. Which meant if I replaced the executable with a dummy that created empty or meaningless files, the system would still register activity. The uploads would still happen, but Richard would be watching nothing. I spent 2 nights building my dummy program. It was simple, deliberately so, a lightweight application that mimicked the original's footprint. Same file size approximately, same startup behavior. It even generated fake screenshot files at the same intervals, small image files filled with static or a generic placeholder. To the server, it would look like normal operation. To Richard, his dashboard would stay green, but every screenshot he received would be useless. The program was ready. Now I just had to make the switch. I chose a Friday night late, after midnight. Friday nights were the lowest traffic periods on our company network. It was off the clock. Richard was definitely not monitoring anything. He was the type who believed weekends were sacred, even if he didn't extend that belief to his employees. I logged into my hidden admin account and opened a terminal window. First step, stop the monitoring service. The program ran as a background process, so I had to terminate it before I could touch the executable. I used a simple kill command. Nothing fancy, just enough to freeze it in place. The dashboard wouldn't immediately notice. The 6-hour status ping wasn't due for another 4 hours. I had time. Second step, locate and rename the original executable. He navigated to the installation folder, buried deep in the system files, hidden from normal view. The main program was there, along with its configuration files, and the hidden folder where it stored captured screenshots. I didn't delete anything. Deletion leaves obvious traces. Instead, I renamed the original executable, changed winservicemonitor.exe to winservicemonitor backup old, a file name that looked like a system-generated artifact, something IT might glance at and dismiss as routine. Third step, copy my dummy into place. I moved my substitute program into the same folder and gave it the original name. Same file path, same process name when running. The system wouldn't know the difference. Fourth step, and this was critical, I modified the file's metadata. Timestamps can betray you. If someone looked at the file properties and saw it was created on this date, at this hour, they'd know something had changed. And so I used a small utility to adjust the timestamps. I matched them to the original installation date, the same Thursday 3 months ago when the security update had arrived. To any casual observer, the file would look like it had been there from the beginning. Fifth step, restart the dummy service. I launched my substitute program. It spun up instantly, a tiny footprint, almost invisible. It began its fake capture cycle, generating placeholder images at 90-second intervals, just like the real thing. Sixth step, clean up. I deleted my terminal history, cleared any temporary files I'd created, logged out of the admin account, and switched back to my normal profile. Then I restarted my machine, a routine power cycle that would blend in with any other restart. When the computer came back up, the dummy was running. The 6-hour ping went out on schedule. The dashboard registered normal activity. And Richard had no idea that his surveillance window was now frosted glass. I didn't celebrate, not yet, because I knew the real test was still coming. Monday morning arrived. I logged in as usual, opened my email, checked my project queue, and I waited. The first sign that everything was working came around 11 a.m. Richard sent a team-wide message about productivity expectations. Generic, passive-aggressive, the kind of email he sent when he wanted to remind everyone he was watching, but there was nothing specific. No targeted comments. No veiled references to anything I'd been working on. That was unusual. Normally, after a week of monitoring, Richard had ammunition. Little jabs about how someone was spending too much time on email or how another person's browser history showed non-work activity. This time, nothing. I ran a quiet test. I opened a personal document completely unrelated to work and typed a phrase I knew would catch attention if anyone was actually reading my screen. Considering options at other companies, updated resume attached. Obviously false. But inflammatory enough that if Richard saw it, he'd react. Nothing happened. No sudden meeting requests. No passive-aggressive check-ins. No whispered conversations with HR. He wasn't seeing anything. The weeks that followed were a strange kind of freedom. I continued doing my job, probably better than before, honestly, because I wasn't constantly self-censoring every keystroke. But I also allowed myself small moments of private work, personal projects, creative writing, research for a side business I'd been quietly developing. Nothing that interfered with my actual responsibilities, but things I never would have done if I'd thought someone was watching. Richard, meanwhile, grew increasingly frustrated. I could see it in his behavior during team calls. He'd ask pointed questions about what people were working on, but his usual precision was gone. He didn't have the surveillance data to back up his insinuations. He was operating blind, and he didn't understand why. There was one close call. About 6 weeks after the swap, IT sent out a routine maintenance notification, a real one this time from Dave, something about updating antivirus definitions. For a moment, I panicked. If IT accessed my machine remotely, if they ran any kind of diagnostic, they might notice the discrepancy. The renamed backup file, the dummy executable, something. I spent that entire day on edge, watching for any sign of investigation, but nothing came. The update installed normally. The dummy kept running. No alerts, no questions. Dave, I realized, probably didn't even know the spy software was there. Richard had likely installed it through a third-party agreement, bypassing it entirely. The right hand didn't know what the left was doing, and that was Richard's weakness. He'd built his surveillance in secret, which meant he couldn't troubleshoot it openly. He couldn't walk up to IT and say, hey, the employee monitoring tool I installed without telling anyone isn't working right. He was trapped by his own secrecy, poetic, really. The final confirmation came 3 months later. Richard left the company, not fired. He took a position elsewhere, a lateral move dressed up as a promotion. But the circumstances were telling. In the weeks before his departure, there had been whispers, employee complaints reaching HR, questions about management style and workplace trust. I never learned the specifics, but I like to think his surveillance obsession caught up with him. That somewhere in those months of watching useless static, he realized his grip was slipping, and he couldn't figure out why. On his last day, he sent a company-wide email, the usual corporate pleasantries. Thanks for the memories. Excited for new opportunities. I read it, closed my laptop, and smiled. He never knew, and that was the sweetest part. Not the confrontation, not the public victory, not the dramatic gotcha moment, just the quiet, private knowledge that I had outplayed him at his own game. And he walked away, believing he'd been in control the entire time. Some victories don't need an audience. Let me be clear about something. What Richard did was wrong. Not wrong in the petty, annoying sense. Wrong in the way that poisons workplaces and destroys trust. He installed surveillance software on my computer, and the computers of who knows how many others, without disclosure, without consent, without any of the legal or ethical safeguards that are supposed to exist when an employer monitors an employee. There was no written policy, no acknowledgement form, no explanation of what was being collected or why. Just silent, invisible watching. That's not management. That's control. And there's a difference. Management trusts employees to do their jobs and create systems to support them. Control assumes employees are threats and creates systems to contain them. Richard treated us like security risks, like suspects, like problems to be surveilled rather than people to be led. And when you treat people that way, you shouldn't be surprised when they stop acting like loyal team members and start acting like exactly the threat you imagine them to be. Was what I did ethical? I think so. And here's why. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't steal data. I didn't disrupt the company's operations or harm any colleagues. I simply refused to be watched without my consent. I took a surveillance system that was illegitimately installed and rendered it harmless. I didn't destroy it. I just made it useless. I turned his spy camera into a prop, his microphone into a dummy. The punishment, in a sense, matched the crime. Richard wanted to watch without being seen, so I made sure he saw nothing at all. There's a broader lesson here. One that goes beyond this one company and this one paranoid manager. We're living in an age where surveillance is easier than ever. Companies can track every click, every keystroke, every moment of so-called idle time. They can monitor screens, log communications, analyze patterns, and the technology is only getting more sophisticated. But here's the thing. Just because you can watch someone doesn't mean you should. Trust is the foundation of any healthy workplace. When you replace trust with surveillance, you might get compliance. But you lose loyalty. You lose creativity. You lose the intangible things that actually make people do their best work. And eventually, you lose the people themselves. I stayed at Helix for another year after Richard left. The new department head was different, transparent, communicative, actually interested in supporting us rather than policing us. Eventually, I moved on to other opportunities. But I left on my own terms, with strong references and no burned bridges. Richard, wherever he is now, probably still thinks he was a good manager. He probably still believes surveillance was necessary, that employees can't be trusted, that the only way to get results is to watch constantly. He's wrong, but he'll never know how wrong, because the best lessons are the ones you never realize you were taught. So let's recap what happened here. 1. I discovered my boss had secretly installed professional-grade surveillance software on my computer. Screen recording, keystroke logging, the whole package. 2, instead of confronting him directly, which would have ended badly for me, I quietly investigated. I learned exactly how the software worked, when it reported, and what its vulnerabilities were. I built a dummy application, a harmless substitute that looked and acted like the real thing but captured nothing of value. 4. I made the swap, renamed the original, inserted my dummy, adjusted the timestamps, and covered my tracks. 5. I watched as Richard slowly lost his surveillance advantage without ever understanding why. And eventually I watched him leave. No drama, no confrontation, no burned bridges, Just a quiet, methodical chess game, and a checkmate he never saw coming. If you've made it this far, thank you. Seriously. This story took a lot of time to tell properly, and the fact that you stayed means a lot. Here's what I'd like to know. Where do you think the line is? When does workplace monitoring become workplace surveillance? When does an employer's legitimate interest in productivity cross into invasion of privacy? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to hear them, especially if you've experienced something similar. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing. This channel is all about stories like this one, moments where ordinary people outthink those with more power, where patience and strategy beat brute force, where justice happens quietly and on its own terms. If that sounds like your thing, stick around. There's more coming. One more thing, if you know someone dealing with a controlling boss or a toxic workplace, someone who could use a reminder that they're not powerless, maybe send them this video. Sometimes the best thing you can give someone is the knowledge that there's another way. Thanks again for watching. Take care of yourselves, and remember, the best surveillance is the kind no one knows you've beaten. Until next time.